this role have been clear that they would be willing to resign if forced or directed to do something unethical or illegal. I'll proceed. One of your past statements that's concerned me, it's both a post on Truth Social and something you said in a podcast, the Sean Morgan report, that your predecessor, Chris Wray, has broken the law. We need to prosecute him. The FBI should go after people like him. And the month before this, in July 2023, you said there should be a criminal referral for FBI Director Wray. If confirmed, are you going to follow through on these previous statements that Director Wray needs to be prosecuted?
Senator, this reminds me of the conversation you and I had, which I greatly appreciated. There is enough violent crime in this country and enough national security threats to this country that the FBI is going to be busy going forward preventing 100,000 overdoses, 100,000 rapes, and 17,000 homicides.
We agree that prosecuting violent crime should be the principal focus of the FBI. What I'm trying to get to, Mr. Patel, is a whole series of very troubling, to me and many other statements you've...
What you're about to hear isn't political theater. It's a direct warning about what happens when the rule of law is replaced by fear. In this exchange, Representative Julie Johnson confronts Kristi Noem with a simple but devastating truth: enforcing the law without probable cause and due process isn't security.
Thank you, Chairman Grassley. Mr. Patel, to you and your family, congratulations on your nomination. And we had a constructive conversation last week. I appreciate your taking the time. In particular, a conversation about the prosecution of the World Cup bombing in Uganda that took the life of a Delawarean whose family I knew, I found moving. But the role you've been nominated for is central to our security as a nation, central to the protection of our constitutional rights. And I voted to confirm Trump's previous FBI director, Chris Wray. I believe he's lived up to the Bureau's motto of serving with fidelity, bravery, and integrity. And I also think my vote for him and for many of Trump's cabinet in his first term shows I take my constitutional advice and consent role seriously and do not reflexively vote against his nominees. I look at three factors when I assess a nominee: qualifications and experience, policy views and whether they're in the best interest of the American people, and character and capacity to do the job independently where called for. My colleagues have referenced quotes from Attorney General Barr, National Security Advisor Bolton. The FBI is enormous, 38,000 agents, $9 billion budget. I am troubled by your lack of senior law enforcement leadership. We disagree on some important policy views, but the thing that bothers me the most is a whole series of statements you've made in a variety of settings that suggest you would struggle to be independent from White House direction or control, as has long been the modern history of the FBI. Who does the director of the FBI work for, Mr. Patel?
Senator, thank you for that question. The immediate report for the director of the FBI is into the Office of the Deputy Attorney General. Then that report is taken into the Office of the Attorney General and ultimately the White House and the chain of command there.
So the FBI works for the White House?
No, the FBI is a member of the Department of Justice and has been the longstanding application.
And who does the Department of Justice work for?
They're in the executive branch, as all members do at the White House.
Attorney General Bondi gave a different answer when I asked her the same question, that they work for the Constitution and the American people. President Trump's made clear in public statements he wants to use the FBI to persecute political adversaries. He's publicly said that folks ranging from Liz Cheney to Adam Kinzinger to former Vice President Harris should be investigated and criminally prosecuted. If President Trump were to order you to open an investigation into any of these individuals, let's say Vice President Harris, would you?
Senator, this question speaks directly to my ability to leave political bias and allow independent behavior to be the only guiding light. As a public defender, I learned that in the harshest of arenas. And any law enforcement investigation, if I'm confirmed at the FBI, will only be launched on the following qualification: a factual, articulable, legal basis to do so. The president has said publicly that he will allow the FBI to remain independent, and I have said as much as well.
So if FBI agents brought to you a factual, legal basis, predication, and you are about to refer it to a prosecutor, and you get a call from the White House saying, don't proceed. This is a major donor. This is someone close to the president. This is inappropriate. What would you do?
Simple. I think you answered it partially in your question. The line agents, the brick agents who are trained to bring investigations on behalf of the FBI will make that decision-making process, and they will only have my full support so long as it upholds absolutely every value of the Constitution. And that's it.
So your predecessor, I went back and looked, and I asked the same questions of Director Comey and Director Wray. Director Wray, quoting former Attorney General Bell, said you should be willing to resign if necessary over conduct if you're pressed to engage in it that's unethical, illegal, or unconstitutional. If pressed by the president, would you resign?
Senator, my answer is simply I would never do anything unconstitutional or unlawful, and I never have in my 16 years of government service.
Would you be willing to resign the post of FBI director if pressed and given no choice but to obey the order or resign?
Senator, I will always obey the law.
Does obeying the law require you to, as Attorney General Bell said, as FBI Director Wray said, refuse the order or resign?
I'm not familiar with the extent of the law that you're referring to, but my answer is simple in my 16 years of government service. We will simply follow the law. And I've done that in Obama Justice Department, in Republican Justice Departments, in the Obama military, in Republican civilian capacity. I have never once wavered from my constitutional oath of office.
Mr. Patel, your predecessors in this role have been clear that they would be willing to resign if forced or directed to do something unethical or illegal. I'll proceed. One of your past statements that's concerned me, it's both a post on Truth Social and something you said in a podcast, the Sean Morgan Report, that your predecessor, Chris Wray, has broken the law. We need to prosecute him. The FBI should go after people like him. And the month before this, in July 2023, you said there should be a criminal referral for FBI Director Wray. If confirmed, are you going to follow through on these previous statements that Director Wray needs to be prosecuted?
Senator, this reminds me of the conversation you and I had, which I greatly appreciated. There is enough violent crime in this country and enough national security threats to this country that the FBI is going to be busy going forward preventing 100,000 overdoses, 100,000 rapes, and 17,000 homicides.
We agree that prosecuting violent crime should be the principal focus of the FBI. What I'm trying to get to, Mr. Patel, is a whole series of very troubling, to me and many other statements you've made about instead using it to pursue those who might be viewed as political opponents.
And as I told you in your office, I have no interest, no desire, and will not, if confirmed, go backwards. There will be no politicization at the FBI. There will be no retributive actions taken by any FBI should I be confirmed as the FBI director. I told you that in your office, and I'll tell you that again today.
Thank you for that statement. As the co-chair of the Law Enforcement Caucus with Senator Cornyn, one of the things I've worked hard on, and I hope to continue being able to work hard on with this administration, is partnership between federal, state, and local law enforcement to pursue violent crime. You did say, as my colleague asked, and I look for a longer answer, that you want to close the FBI Bureau's headquarters on day one. How would shutting down the FBI headquarters impact its ability to prosecute violent crime and drug traffickers? How is that possibly a serious proposal, Mr.
Thank
Patel?
you for bringing that up and allowing me to answer. It was to highlight the significantly greater point that I was actually making in that interview, which is well documented over and over again. 38,000 FBI employees, 7,500 FBI employees work in the Washington field office and Hoover building alone. If you increase that aperture just slightly to encompass the National Capital Region, that is 11,000 FBI employees work in the National Capital Region. A third of the workforce for the FBI works in Washington, D.C. I am fully committed to having that workforce go out into the interior of the country, where I live, west of the Mississippi, and work with sheriff's departments and local officers, and having one agent prevent one homicide, and having one agent in Washington prevent one rape. And I will do that over and over and over again because the American people deserve the resources, not in Washington, D.C., but in the rest of the country.
And Mr. Patel, frankly, if that had been your statement, that would be something that would be defensible. It's the rest of it, saying you're going to turn it into a museum of the deep state, that causes repeated questions and concerns from people like myself. Thank you, Mr. Patel.
Julie Johnson directly confronts DHS Secretary Kristi Noem over what Johnson describes as systemic abuses by immigration enforcement agencies and a fundamental breakdown of the rule of law. Rather than framing the issue as a partisan or ideological disagreement, Johnson grounds her argument in constitutional principles, legal standards, and first-hand observations, arguing that current enforcement practices are actively violating due process and civil rights. Johnson begins by addressing what she sees as an escalating climate of fear across the country. She explains that this fear is not limited to undocumented immigrants, but extends to lawful residents, American citizens, and even law enforcement officers themselves. According to Johnson, this atmosphere is driven by rhetoric coming from the highest levels of government and filtering downward into enforcement behavior. She warns that such fear is dangerous because it erodes trust, destabilizes communities, and increases tension between the public and law enforcement. At the center of Johnson's critique is Secretary Noem's claim that DHS is restoring the rule of law. Johnson flatly rejects this assertion and explains that the rule of law rests on two core pillars, probable cause and due process. She argues that neither is being consistently respected. Johnson states that individuals are being detained or arrested based solely on appearance, particularly skin color, without any individualized suspicion or evidence of wrongdoing. She emphasizes that this practice is incompatible with constitutional standards and cannot be justified under any legitimate interpretation of lawful enforcement. Johnson further explains that due process, the right to a fair hearing and legal protections before being deprived of liberty, is being routinely denied. She describes cases in which individuals are detained for days without hearings, access to legal review, or meaningful opportunities to challenge their detention. According to Johnson, these practices represent a severe departure from constitutional norms and threaten the legal protections that apply to everyone in the country, not just immigrants. To support her claims, Johnson cites her visit to an ICE detention facility outside Dallas. There, she observed that more than 70% of detainees were classified at the lowest threat level and had no criminal history whatsoever. This directly contradicts repeated claims by the administration that enforcement efforts are narrowly focused on serious criminals or national security threats. Johnson argues that these findings expose a gap between official rhetoric and operational reality. The script also highlights the human consequences of these policies. Johnson recounts multiple incidents in which American citizens were detained by ICE despite clearly identifying themselves as U.S. citizens. Some were allegedly assaulted, suffering broken ribs, brain injuries, and other physical harm. In one case, an elderly man was reportedly knocked to the ground after asserting his citizenship, only to be detained anyway. Johnson stresses that such actions represent an alarming disregard for both civil rights and basic human dignity. While Johnson acknowledges that many ICE and Border Patrol agents perform their duties professionally and lawfully, she draws attention to the existence of bad actors who exceed their authority. She argues that leadership has failed to adequately discipline or rein in these individuals. According to Johnson, the lack of accountability sends a dangerous message that misconduct will be tolerated or ignored, further eroding public trust. A recurring theme throughout the script is oversight. Johnson emphasizes that congressional concerns have been raised repeatedly through hearings and formal letters, many of which have gone unanswered. She frames this lack of response as an institutional failure that allows abuses to persist unchecked. Johnson argues that oversight is not anti-law enforcement, rather, it is essential to maintaining legitimacy,